Assolatuwassalam, 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 Assolatuwassalam.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا ربنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من كرمك علما يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين، واجعلنا من المتقربين إليك على علم وهدى وبصيرة يا فتاح يا عليم. وبعد. Inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, we will be continuing in our talks on the book Al-Maqasid, the section on tazkiyatun nafs, the principles of self-purification, by Imam Nawawi rahimahullah tabaraka wa ta'ala. In the previous session, we mentioned that Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala identified as the foundational principles of self-purification in Islam 5 major principles. Those were the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in secret and in public, following the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in word and in action, al-i'rad an al-khalq fil-iqbali wal-idbar, detachment from worldly things and from the praising or the censure of people, al-rida an Allah fil-qalil wal-kathir, being pleased with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it is plenty or whether it is a little. In other words, you've been given a lot or a little. And the 5th is al-ruju' ila Allah fi sarra'i wal darra, and that is having recourse to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in good times and in bad times. So we'll continue with reading what Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned. So he now goes into those 5 principles and he tells us how to achieve them. Of course, he is very brief in what he says because he's basically outlining the structure of the Islamic spiritual system. Inshallah ta'ala, we will go into some detail in our explanation of what he says, rahimahullah ta'ala. So he said, فَتَحْقِيقُ التَّقْوَى بِالْوَرَعِ وَالْإِسْتِقَامَةِ. The attainment of taqwa is achieved by 2 things. Al-wara', which is to have inner piety, and al-istiqamah, which is to have persistence in the practice of the sharia. So now we are dealing in this one sentence with 3 different principles or 3 different concepts. The first being taqwa itself, the second being wara', and the third being al-istiqamah. And we'll talk about each of those inshallah ta'ala. We'll start with the first, which is taqwa. The other 2 were meant to explain what is taqwa or how to attain taqwa. So we'll talk about taqwa itself before going into the others by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Taqwa is one of the most important principles of the life of a Muslim. It revolves around taqwa. The honor of the human being itself is determined by taqwa. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Those who are the most honored, the most honorable and thus most honored in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those with the most taqwa. And so taqwa is very essential to the spiritual life of a Muslim. So we'll talk about that conceptually. We already spoke generally what taqwa is, gave an idea of what it is, but we'll go into the concept of taqwa inshallah ta'ala. Taqwa comes from the Arabic root waqa, and waqa means protection. Wiqaya means protection. So if we say waqa, we're saying that he protected. That is the meaning of the word waqa. And then when we add the alif and the ta to it in the Arabic form, it becomes ittaqa. And that form of verb in the Arabic language has an underlying meaning of what the Arabs call mutawa'a, and that is submission from the self, or an attempt from a thing to achieve a certain action. And so in this case, it is a submissive attempt from the subject of that verb, being the person, to achieve protection. Ittaqa. So ittaqa means he tried to protect himself. In the Quran, usually the object of that verb is the word Allah. And often we find this in the Quran. Ittaqu Allah. So, O you who believe, strive to protect yourself, and then the object of that protection becomes, in terms of language, the word Allah. Protect yourself from Allah. What is missing in that, when we say missing, it is omitted because it's obvious. That's the way that Arabic language works, is the word punishment. So the sentence becomes, O you who believe, protect yourselves from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ittaqa means to protect yourself. Ittaqullaha means protect yourselves from the punishment or the wrath or the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what brings about the anger or the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The neglect to obey His commands. When somebody refuses to obey His command, that is what brings about the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without tawbah. If somebody is not doing what Allah commanded them to do, or they're doing what He prohibited them from doing without making tawbah, then they are removing themselves from the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're putting themselves in the danger zone of bringing upon themselves the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that is definite, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful and He forgives people, but they are putting themselves in that line of fire, so to speak, in which they are now subject to the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another aspect brought about by the form of that word in the Arabic language is the idea of choice. Because ittaqa, that form of the Arabic language, ifta'ala, brings about, or the underlying meaning we said is mutawa'a. In other words, it is done from a person's desire to do so. So it's not protection, have others protect you. That's not the command in the Quran. O you who believe, have people protect you from the punishment of Allah. It's not it's you protect yourself. So the idea of choice. Taqwa now, with this dimension that is brought in by the language itself, means a person's choice. Taqwa is a person's choice to protect himself from the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other concept brought in just by the form of the word is takleef, legal responsibility, because now you're making a choice. So if you do not have the ability to make that choice, then the act is not expected from you. So taqwa is not expected from a child, because the child cannot make a legal choice to obey or not obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's also not expected from somebody who does not have full consciousness. So the insane person is not expected to have taqwa, or somebody asleep is not expected to have taqwa, and so on. So ittaqullaha, have the taqwa of Allah, becomes or the ayah, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha, O you who believe, have taqwa, means O you who believe, make a choice to protect yourself from the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by obeying what He commanded and staying away from what He prohibited subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's taqwa. Taqwa is, as some of the ulama defined it, الحذر من جميع ما أمر الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يحذر منه. It is to be cautious of whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands that you be cautious about. So the idea of taqwa now becomes caution. So taqwa is caution. And that meaning has been presented in a narration from Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa arda. So it has been narrated that somebody came to Abu Huraira and said to him, what is taqwa? And Abu Huraira asked the question, he said, have you ever one day come across a path that is filled with thorns? So you have a narrow walkway, and in that walkway a lot of thorns. The man said yes. Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu said, and how did you cross that path? So the man said, when I saw it, أذلت عنه وتجاوزت بالاحترام. He said, when I came across that path and I saw the thorns, I humbled myself onto it. Meaning I recognized its potential to harm me, and I crossed with extreme caution. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, ذاك التقوى. He said, that is taqwa, is to live your life. In other words, the metaphor being drawn by Abu Hurairah is that life is like a narrow passage from one place to another, from this realm into the akhirah. And you are crossing. That's what you have to do. Your job is to cross. When you are crossing, there are many things that can harm you, like the thorns. So sins, disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing haram things, doing makruh things, breaching the adab of Islam, in this metaphor, are like thorns. They can easily prick you. So to avoid being pricked, being harmed, you need to walk with extreme caution. And so this is what taqwa is al-hadar, is caution. And from that, a lot of people translate taqwa as fear, but it's not fear as in the sense of, because fear indicates the loss of hope sometimes. But it's not that. The taqwa is cautiousness that leads to hope. The reason you're being cautious is because you have a hope in the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why you're being cautious. So it's not a fear of, oh, if I don't, that Allah is this angry Allah. No, Allah is merciful, He also has wrath, but you are having hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reality of taqwa is then, based on all what we mentioned, the reality of taqwa is to act in accordance to the sharia. If somebody asks, how do we achieve this taqwa that you're talking about? We say, follow the sharia, because the sharia is there to preserve taqwa. Do what is there. Do, number one, all of your wajibat. Everything that is wajib upon you, do that. This is why Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he said the taqi, the person who possesses taqwa, when he wakes up in the morning, he makes an intention. He said, oh Allah, I promise you today that I will do all that is wajib and stay away from all that is haram. That is a niyyah to have taqwa. To do so, the reality of taqwa is obedience to sharia. Do what is wajib, stay away from what is haram. And then there are different levels of taqwa. And so understanding ourselves, just to go back to an important point, and that is the entire spiritual system of Islam is built on a knowledge of the self. Do not ignore that. You need to know yourself. So understanding yourself means to know where exactly you are, or try to know exactly where you are and where you need to be in terms of the heart. Knowing the levels of taqwa means you can know where you are, what you have to work on, and how to move on. So when we talk about the levels of taqwa, we're talking about it from that perspective. The levels of taqwa start at staying away from muharramat. Before doing wajibat, we have to stay away from muharramat. Stay away from what is haram. And the first thing we look at is shirk. Stay away from shirk. Shirk means to associate any partners with Allah in worship. subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there are levels of staying away from shirk. There are outward levels, and then there are inward levels. But stay away from shirk. Then once we are people who are not involving ourselves in any form of shirk, then the next step of achieving taqwa is then to stay away from everything haram. To preserve the body, 7 aspects of the body, meaning the eye, the tongue, the ears, the limbs, meaning the hands, the feet, the private parts, the stomach, to keep those things away from all that is haram for them. And then once we are people that stay away from shirk, and we are people that stay away from that which is haram, the next step is to stay away from doubtful matters, shubuhat, things that we're not sure whether they're halal or they're haram. Then the best thing is to stay away from them. And then once we're people that stay away from shirk, stay away from haram things, stay away from doubtful things, the next step of taqwa is to stay away from overindulgence in halal things. Because if we constantly do excess of halal things, eventually we will be tempted to do haram things. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu ardah, also Umar ibn al-Khattab, there are 2 narrations. They said, we stay away from 70 baban min al-halal, which is just a number that means a lot. So we stay away from a lot of halal things in fear that by overindulging in them, we end up doing haram things. You see, if we live at the edge, if we make, for example, if a person makes his limits for his life haram and wajib, so he's only doing the things that are obligatory and only staying away from the things that are absolutely clear-cut haram, then in moments of laziness, in moments of fatra, which is called like a downtime, when we become negligent and we slip, we'll be slipping into haram things. If your limit is haram, then on a moment of lapsing, you end up doing what is haram. If the limits of what you do in terms of obedience is you only do that which is obligatory, then when you're tired, for example, one day, and all you're accustomed to praying are the obligatory prayers, on a day of laziness, you'll be tempted to leave off what? The obligatory prayers. But if you make your limits beyond that, so for example, you always pray the nafil prayers that are related to the fard prayers before and after. On a day of laziness, what you'll be tempted to leave off is something mustahab. So you're never in the danger zone of leaving off obligatory things or doing haram things. And we'll continue in the next session, inshallah ta'ala. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Assolatuwassalam, 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 Assolatuwassalam.